Hey, welcome back to Connection Point Studies. We hope you're enjoying this study. It's called Pro-Choice. It'll lead us right up to Easter, and we're in our second week, and we've got a warm-up question for you to kind of focus on today. Now, a warm-up question is where everyone in your group answers, and we want you to get to know each other a little bit. So, Ron, let's give them a warm-up question.
Yeah, so the question is, where do you go when you want to get away from it all? Just a nice, relaxing place. Where would you go?
Where would you go? And then, why is that place a relaxing place? Don't you think that's that's a good question? Okay, and then before you come back, read Matthew chapter 11, the entire chapter, and think about this. What was John the Baptist feeling when he sent his disciples to Jesus? And you be ready to answer that question, and we'll talk about it. So, Ron, chapter 11 here, this chapter starts in, and John the Baptist is sending his disciples to kind of check Jesus out. Is he really the one? And what was happening here?
Well, you have to remember that Jesus and John the Baptist were cousins.
Yep.
So they knew each other. Jesus had been baptized by John. Mm-hmm. And so then it's kind of weird, isn't it, that Jesus, he sends his disciples to ask Jesus this question. Yeah. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, we talked about last time how Jesus prepared his disciples. Things are going to be tough. You'll be arrested, prison. Here's John in prison.
In prison. Mm-hmm.
And so maybe he's thinking, if you're the Messiah, why am I in prison?
Yeah. Well, Jesus and John were within 6 months of each other.
Yeah.
In their age. So they both had very effective ministry. John had been in effective ministry. Now, essentially, he was shut down.
Yeah.
Now, without having a voice, I think he's looking at Jesus and saying, man, it seems like you're doing it different.
Isn't that what ministers always do?
Yeah, it always is. It always is, yeah. So we want him to focus on another question as we dig in a little bit deeper in this passage. Let's give him the next question.
So as John's disciples walk away, Jesus turns to the crowd and says some things about John. And they're found in verse 7 through 15. And so what did he say, and why do you think he said these things?
That's a good question. Okay, Ron, Jesus said some pretty, I think he said some pretty neat things about his cousin, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
He was really elevating him, right?
Yeah, in fact, so you can imagine if you were in the crowd and Jesus says to, this thing to John and sends his disciples about John, he sends his disciples away, you might be thinking, oh, is Jesus like down on John? Maybe he doesn't like him. Maybe he doesn't believe in him anymore or whatever. And so he says really good things about him. And to say this was his role.
Yeah, it's a powerful, I love the thought that Jesus didn't have to ever put anyone down,
right,
that he knew had a specific role.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the next question we want him to kind of think about it, you can read Matthew 11, 16 through 24. We want you to think about this. What did Jesus say about the choice to believe that they had? What is it that he said about that choice? And then we'll come back and talk about it.
Dan, it's funny because when people read this passage, they might think, well, he's not talking about a choice here. But he sort of is, right? He says, these people are like, kids in a marketplace. They say, well, we sang a dirge and you didn't mourn, and all this stuff. And so I think what he's saying is people have this expectation about what following God is like. And then it turns out it's not really what you thought.
It's easy, right?
Yeah, and so really, it's expect the unexpected. You never know where God's going to take you.
And the choice to follow simply means that you have to follow wherever it takes you. And it was interesting. John's disciples were following him to prison.
Yeah,
checking up on him, doing it was just pretty amazing. Well, the next question we want you to think about is, how does Jesus explain the fact that the religious leaders did not accept the message? And you can kind of look at chapter 11, verses 25 through 27, and think about that, and we'll come back and talk about it.
So, you know, it's funny because of all the people who should have known, you would think these guys should know. They had the Old Testament memorized.
I know, they memorized it. They knew it better than anybody.
Yeah, and then Jesus says, he says to his Father, he says, I praise you, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Now, he's not speaking about, you know, little children literally, but people whose understanding was, by comparison, like childlike.
It gives me a chance.
It does. Yeah,
I'm a simple guy. I got to have it kind of simple, and it seems like Jesus was there for the common person. Anybody could follow him, and
that's a comforting thought. Yeah,
it is a great thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, what does Jesus invite people to do? That's what we want you to think about next. What is it that he invites people to do? Look at verses 20. I think it's
28 through 30.
28 through 30.
Yeah.
As you look at that, what does Jesus invite people to do? Okay, Ron, what does he invite people to do? What's
well, you know, for most people, they would have looked at the Pharisees in their town and said, that's what it means to really love God. Look how hard those guys work.
Yeah.
They memorize the Bible.
Yeah.
They do all the right things.
They were supposed to be the examples. You're right.
Yeah, and then he says, come to me, I'll give you rest. I have this easy yoke. I'll take the burden is, I mean, it's like, what? The Pharisees, they have this huge yoke. It's very heavy. And it's like,
and people don't even know what a yoke is. So just if you don't know what a yoke is, it was a wooden fashioned for an ox that would allow them to pull things, right? It was a yoke, and each ox had to have it fashioned exactly to fit the particular ox.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fascinating, because since Jesus was a carpenter, he would have made yokes.
Exactly, yeah. And you get this picture like he's saying, this ought to be easy.
Well, I think he's saying, my yoke fits. You know, my instructions fit your life. And boy, it does. His instructions in my life always fits. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this study. It's always good to look again at Jesus' words and think about what he's doing. And so you think about a way to apply that to your life. As you get around in your group, think about how you've accepted his instruction and what are the choices you're making. So take a little bit of time, pray together as a group, and we'll see you next week at Connection Point Studies.